March 17, 1943. The North Atlantic churned under a gray, oppressive sky, a swirling graveyard 400 miles south of the coast of Iceland. Convoy Agashis 229, consisting of 41 merchant ships, plowed steadily through 15-foot swells, each laden with a precious cargo totaling 140,000 tons. But this was no ordinary cargo. This was food, fuel, ammunition, the very lifeblood of a nation teetering on the edge of starvation. On the deck of the SS William Eustace, Captain James Bannerman, just 28 years old, gripped the rail tightly as his ship rocked wildly. His eyes scanned the black horizon through binoculars. Not needing to be told, he felt it in his bones. That unseen dangers lurked just beyond sight. They were out there, and they were listening beneath the waves, just 600 yards off the convoy's port beam. Captain Lieutenant Helmut Mansack sat in the suffocating silence of U-758's control room. His hydrophone operator pressed his headphones tightly against his ears, eyes closed, listening to the underwater symphony of the convoy's approach. Contact bearing to Antonio multiple screws. Heavy machinery noise. Estimate 40 vessels. Mansack smiled and raised the microphone to his lips. The wolfpack stirred, ready to unleash hell. What none of them knew neither Captain Bannerman praying for dawn, nor Captain Lieutenant Mansack, already tasting victory, was that in the galley of that same Liberty ship. A 28-year-old ship's cook named Tommy Lawson, was washing dishes. He was not a captain, not a naval architect, not a scientist. Yet he had noticed something strange, something overlooked by every admiral, every engineer, every physicist in the Allied command, something that would change the entire battle of the Atlantic. Over the next 6 days, the carnage was horrific. 22 merchant ships, from convoys HX 229 and SC-122, were torpedoed, torn apart by the ruthless beast beneath the waves, sinking into the icy depths of the North Atlantic. 300 merchant seamen were dragged to their deaths beneath the waves. This was the worst convoy disaster since 1942. In Germany, Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the U-boat fleet, would later call it the greatest convoy battle of all time. The staggering numbers from that month painted a story so devastating that it was kept secret from the British public. In March 1943 alone, U-boats sank 567,000 tons of Allied shipping, more than any other month of the entire war. The losses were catastrophic, unsustainable. At that pace, Britain had only 3 months of food supplies left. 3 months until the nation starved. 3 months until it would have to surrender. Prime Minister Winston Churchill, a man of iron resolve, would later reflect in his memoirs, "The only thing that really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril." This was the crisis point. This was the moment the war could be lost. Not on the beaches of Normandy, not in the skies over London, but right here in the cold, dark waters of the Atlantic. The Allies were powerless to stop it. Why? How was this happening? The answer was not strategy. It was not courage. The answer was sound. German hydrophone technology was brutally and terrifyingly effective. A U-boat, silent and hidden 400 feet beneath the surface, could hear the propeller noise of a convoy from 80 nautical miles away. Individual merchant ships like the William Eustace betrayed their exact position from up to 12 miles distant. The sound signature was unmistakable: the thrum, thrum, thrum of cavitating propellers, the deep rumble of engine vibrations, the resonance of the entire hullet, all acted like a massive, screaming beacon for German torpedoes. The Liberty ship's propeller, 15-foot diameter nacelle, to the sharks of the Atlantic broadcast their location with merciless clarity. Allied escort vessels tried every tactic possible. They enforced total radio silence. They forced convoys to run frantic zigzag patterns. Their destroyers and corvettes swept the seas with Aztec, an early version of sonar. But nothing worked. The convoys were simply too loud. The ocean, a perfect medium for sound, carried their location for miles, and the U-boats, hunting in their infamous wolf packs, only had to sit silent, wait, and listen. What the Allies didn't know, and what no one could have known, was that the solution would not come from a naval engineer. It would not come from an acoustic scientist in a research lab. It would come from a merchant ship's cook who had dropped out of school at 14. It would come from naval headquarters in Liverpool, England. By March 1943, the men of the Western Approaches Command had been fighting the U-boat menace for 3.5 brutal years. They had thrown every piece of technology they possessed at the problem and failed. In 1941, the Royal Navy had equipped every escort vessel with Aztec sonar, the supposed war winner. This active sonar detected submerged U-boats at 2,500 yards, but only if the submarine was directly ahead. The U-boat commanders quickly learned to attack from the side or stern outside that narrow Aztec cone. Even worse, Aztec was useless against surface attacks at night, exactly what the Wolfpacks had perfected. Failure. Juan. In 1942, scientists at the Admiralty Research Laboratory developed high-frequency direction finding, nicknamed HuffDuff. This brilliant system tracked U-boat radio transmissions perfectly until the moment a Wolfpack reached the convoy and stopped transmitting, shifting to just listening. Allied ships, meanwhile, continued broadcasting their location not over radio spot with every turn of their propellers. Failure 2. By early 1943, the Royal Navy had poured $8.7 million, over $500 million in today's currency to solve this single acoustic signature problem. Professor Patrick Blackett, Director of Naval Operational Research, published a classified paper stating clearly, merchant vessel propeller cavitation and machinery resonance create underwater sound profiles detectable at extreme range without fundamental hull redesign, which is impossible during wartime production. Convoys will continue to announce their positions to enemy hydrophones. The expert consensus was final. It was impossible to make a 10,000-ton merchant ship quiet enough to evade detection. It was a fantasy, Dr. Harold Burrus, chief naval architect at the Admiralty, explained the physics in a memo dated February 14, 1943. He detailed that a Liberty ship's propeller rotates at 76 RPM under load, displacing 22,000 tons of water. The resulting cavitation, the formation and collapse of bubbles on the blades generates massive acoustic energy, optimized for German hydrophonies. To reduce that noise would require a complete propulsion system redesign, entailing 6 months in dry dock per vessel and manufacturing capabilities the Allies simply didn't possess. The stakes couldn't be higher. Britain was an island, importing 2/3 of its food and 100% of its petroleum by sea, and in March 1943, German U-boats were sinking ships faster than Allied shipyards could build them. At the Atlantic Convoy Conference in London on March 4, 1943, Rear Admiral Leonard Murray delivered a blunt and terrifying message. Gentlemen, we are losing. Our escorts couldn't hear the U-boats because of our own convoy noise. The enemy could hear us from 50 miles away. Unless we solve this acoustic detection problem, we will lose the Atlantic by summer. the room erupted in desperate and impossible ideas. A British naval engineer proposed installing sound-dampening mounts on every piece of machinery aboard every merchant ship. Estimated cost $250 per visa. With 2,400 ships in the convoy system, retrofitting the fleet would take 138 years. Rejected, an American scientist suggested coating ship hulls with rubber to absorb sound. Tested and rejected. Degraded in salt water within weeks, created massive drag, reducing ship speed by 3 knots, making convoys even more vulnerable. Rejected. A Canadian engineer proposed redesigning all propellers with swept-back blades to reduce cavitation. An excellent idea, but absolutely unfeasibly. It would require retooling every propeller foundry in North America. Rejected by March 15, 1943, just 2 days before the slaughter of Convoy. HX-229. The Allied naval commanders accepted a grim reality. There was no technological solution to the acoustic signature problem. Merchant ships would continue to announce their positions to every listening U-boat. The only strategy left was to add more escorts, more air cover, and hope that enough ships and crews survived the gauntlet to keep Britain in the war. But 800 miles to the west, aboard a Liberty ship struggling through a North Atlantic gale, a cook was about to prove every expert wrong. Thomas Patrick Lawson didn't have an engineering degree. In fact, he had no degree at all. Born in South Boston, Massachusetts, in 1915, Lawson dropped out of school at 14 to help support his family during the Great Depression, working as a line cook at a diner and later as a galley hand on coastal freighters. He knew how to make scrambled eggs for 50 men. He knew how to brace himself when the ship rolled, but he knew nothing about acoustic physics. When the war broke out, he joined the U.S. Merchant Marine at 26 knot out of heroism or patriotism, but because merchant ships paid $125 a month, triple his wage in Boston. He was just a man trying to make a living in the most dangerous job in the world. His captain's evaluation in June 1942 was blunt. Lawson TP ship's cook, adequate performance, no leadership potential. Recommended for galley duties only. Nobody expected genius from the man who made breakfast. But Lawson had something that admirals and scientists lacked time for. He spent his off-watch hours in a strange place, the engine room, where he did not sleep or play cards, but listened. His crewmates thought he was crazy. First mate Robert Chung warned, "Tommy's going to get himself killed down there. That engine room is hot as hell and twice as loud." But Lawson wasn't there for heat. He was there because the engine room was a symphony. A cook who spent his life identifying subtle flavors was now identifying subtle sounds. He heard the high-pitched whine of the main turbine, the low, shuddering thud of the propeller shaft turning in its housing. He felt the vibration travel from the engine mounts through his feet into the steel deck and out into the water. He had noticed something. On February 19, 1943, in mid-Atlantic, the William Eustace traveled in convoy SC-118, consisting of 63 ships in 9 columns. Suddenly, a U-boat alert ripped through the night. The klaxon's blare echoed everywhere. Lawson crouched near the main steam line next to the ship's engineer, a gruff Scotsman named Donald MacLeod, who shouted over the turbines, "Get back to your galley! Cook, this is no place for you." Then the ship shuddered, though the explosion sounded distant and dull. Lawson heard what came after, the hollow booming sound of thousands of tons of sea water rushing into the dying hull. A final gurgling scream, then silence. The U-boat could no longer hear it. The ship had gone silent. Lawson grabbed McLeod's arm, wide-eyed. The sinking ship, it stopped making noise. McLeod shoved him away, wiping grease from his face. Of course it stopped, you bloody idiot. It's full of water. It sunk. No, you don't understand, Lawson pleaded. Though not an engineer, he struggled to explain. When water flooded the hull, it stopped the machinery vibrations. It dampened the sound, and the U-boat couldn't hear any more. McLeod stared, unconvinced, focused on damage control. Then McLeod shouted, "So what if we flood parts of our ship on purpose? Not enough to sink, as just enough to silence the machinery noise." His expression shifted from confusion to contempt. "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. You want to sink us, to stop us from being sunk? Get back to your galley, cook, and stay there." But Lawson couldn't let it go. For 2 weeks, as the William Eustace limped toward England, he sketched diagrams in a cheap notebook. He understood plumbing and tanks, so he designed water-filled chambers around the propeller shaft and ballast tanks pressed against engine mounts. A system of controlled flooding. Though not a physicist, he had stumbled onto a core acoustic principle. Water is dense, a terrible conductor of vibration, and it absorbs sound. He showed his notebook to McLeod, who dismissed him without a glance. The first mate laughed in his face. "Even Captain Bannerman exhausted," said Son. "I appreciate your initiative, but leave the engineering to the engineers. We have experts working on this." Lawson was the cook, and nobody took the cook seriously. When the William Eustace finally docked in Liverpool on March 24th, the crew had 48 hours shore leave. Lawson was supposed to relax, find a pub, forget the horrors of the crossing. Instead, he did something unauthorized, career-endangering, insane. He washed his face, put on his cleanest uniform, and walked straight into the Western Approaches Command headquarters to speak to an admiral about you. He was arrested almost immediately. 2 Royal Navy shore patrol officers intercepted him at the nerve center of the Battle of the Atlantic. This was no place for a random American merchant seaman. "You can't be here," one said, grabbing Lawson's arm. He pleaded, desperate about convoy noise. "I have an idea, and drawings." They pushed him toward the door, ready to throw him in the brig. But a sharp voice called from across the lobby, Commander Peter Gretton, a 29-year-old Royal Navy officer who had commanded escort groups through some of the war's bloodiest battles, recently returned from Convoy Ons 5, where he lost 13 merchant ships to Wolf. Gretton was exhausted, furious, desperate for any edge. "What?" he asked, voice tight. "Did you say convoy noise?" Lawson explained quickly, words tumbling out. The engine room, the sinking ship, the hollow boom, then silence. The concept: water, dampening, machinery, vibrations. Gretton listened, arms crossed, face a mask of stone. When Lawson finished, Gretton declared flatly, "That is the most ridiculous thing I have heard all month. Water inside a ship is called sinking, Mr. Lawson." "Not if you control it," Lawson blurted out. "Not if it's in chambers, small sealed chambers around propeller shaft bearings against engine mounts. You're not flooding the whole ship, just creating acoustic insulation." Gretton froze, turned back slowly. "Say that again." "Acoustic insulation, sir. Water absorbs vibration better than air or steel. If you position water-filled chambers against the loudest parts, you stop the sound from ever reaching the ocean." Gretton's eyes narrowed. He looked at Lawson and no longer saw a cook, but a man speaking a language he hadn't expected. "Come with me," he said. The next day, Gretton took Lawson to the HMS Sunflower, a corvette in dry dock for repairs. If this worked, Gretton said quietly, they'd test on a small scale secretly. No admiral or naval architect could know. Over 3 frantic days, Lawson, Gretton, and the skeptical chief engineer welded empty oil drums around the corvette's propeller shaft housing, filled them with seawater, and stacked sandbags to simulate water-filled bladders pressing against the engine mounts. According to every Royal Navy regulation, this was unauthorized vandalism of a king's vessel. On March 28, 1943, they ran the first test. The Sunflower motored slowly into the Mersey River. A British submarine, a Guy MESC Trespasser, submerged 500 yards away. Hydrophones active. Lawson gripped the deck, hands shaking. The submarine surfaced and signaled Gretton. Heard you clear as day engine noise, propeller cavitation. Same as always failure. Gretton's face sank. The engineer muttered, told you it was bloody stupid. But Lawson noticed the drums weren't full, they were leaking. We need to seal them, make them watertight. Gretton's career flashed before his eyes. If the Admiralty finds I'm modifying a warship on a cook's hunch, I'll be court-martialed. Lawson looked him dead in the eye. And if the Admiralty finds out you're sinking 20 ships a week because you're too proud to test a cook's idea, we lose the war. After a long agonizing moment, Gretton said, 3 more days. They worked around the clock, welding sealed steel chambers, adding water-filled rubber bladders pressed tightly against engine mounts, creating what naval engineers would later call liquid acoustic dampening. On April 2nd, they ran the second test. This time, at full speed, the Trespasser submerged 1,000 yards away. Minutes passed. The river was silent. No signal. The submarine captain surfaced, binoculars in hand, confused. Gretton got the message. At 400 yards. Sir, you disappeared. Lawson's hands trembled. It worked. On April 3rd, an emergency meeting was called at Admiralty headquarters. Rear Admiral Sir Max Horton, a hardened submariner, and the most important and feared man in the Royal Navy, was there with senior officers and the chief naval architect, who had declared acoustic dampening impossible weeks before. With Commander Gretton was Thomas Patrick Lawson. The room fell silent. The presence of a merchant cook in the Admiralty boardroom was shocking. Gretton presented the test results. Hydrophone detection reduced from 12 miles to 400 yards, a 97% acoustic signature reduction. The room erupted in disbelief. Dr. Burroughs shouted, "You've conducted unauthorized modifications to a Royal Navy vessel based on the suggestion of a cook who knows less about acoustics than our entire department." Gretton fired back. "Commander, you are wildly out of line." Captain Edmund Rushbrook, Director of Naval Intelligence, warned about reckless experimentation compromising existing systems. Gretton retorted that the existing system had allowed catastrophic losses, 567,000 tons sunk. Admiral Horton raised his hand and called for silence. He looked across the room, not at Gretton or Burroughs, but Archie Lawson. "Explain it to me, Mr. Lawson," he said quietly. Lawson swallowed hard. "Sir, ship machinery creates vibration. That vibration travels through the steel hull and into the water. But water itself absorbs vibration far better than air or steel. If you position water-filled sealed chambers around the propeller shafts and engine mounts, you create barriers, insulation. You stop the sound from reaching the ocean." Dr. Burroughs insisted that water inside ship structures posed weight distribution, stability, and corrosion problems. Lawson corrected him. "Positioned specifically for dampening this is not flooding the whole ship. It's not a stability issue, it's acoustic. Buru scoffed, calling the proof inconclusive. Conducted in a quiet river with a friendly submarine, not the North Atlantic. Admiral Horton leaned back silently, weighing the stakes. What would it take to retrofit a convoy? He asked. Captain Rushbrook protested. Hundreds of ships, diverted steel, dockyard crews too busy, 6 weeks dry dock per ship. Lawson interrupted quietly. It doesn't take 6 weeks. The prototype on the Sunflower took 3 days. It's not complex engineering, just welding sealed chambers filled with seawater onto existing structures. Dockyard crews can do it. Ship engineers can maintain it. He made his final plea. You don't need to retrofit every ship yet. Just test 6 ships in a convoy. That's all I ask. 6. A tense silence rippled through the room. Admiral Horton stood, turned away, his back to the room. He weighed the loss of the war against the word of a cook. Then he faced them. Commander Gretton, you will retrofit 6 merchant ships in convoy on 184 departing Liverpool in 8 days. You will have your test. Gretton exhaled. Yes, sir, Mr. Lawson. You will supervise the installation and train the engineers, Horton commanded, fixing the chief naval architect with a cold stare. You will provide Commander Gretton with any technical support he requires, even if you think it's insane. Horton paused at the door. If it works, we implement it fleet-wide. If it fails, Commander Gretton, you will spend the rest of this war commanding a minesweeper in the Orkney Islands. Clear. Crystal, sir, Gretton answered. Horton looked Lawson one last time. Mr. Lawson, I don't know if you're a genius or a madman, but I know we're desperate. Don't make me regret this. Lawson swallowed hard. I won't, sir. From April 11th to 18th, 1943, at the H.M. Dockyard in Liverpool, a frantic race against time began. 6 merchant ships were chosen: SS Daniel Webster, James Herod, John Davenport, Samuel Eliot, Benjamin Kite, and Lawson's own SS William Eustace. The installation was brutally simple. Teams of welders worked around the clock, attaching cylindrical steel chambers 24 inches in diameter, filled with seawater around the main propeller shaft housings. They installed water-filled rubber bladders pressed tightly against the engine mounts and steamline supports. Total added weight per ship was 18 tons. Total installation time just 64 hours per vessel. Naval engineers were openly skeptical. Some muttered it looked like jury-rigged plumbing in the engine room. He wasn't wrong. But the tests didn't lie. Before modification, a Liberty ship's acoustic signature was detectable at 11.7 miles. After modification, just 0.4 miles. The ships had become 29 times quieter. On April 22, 1943, convoy on 184 departed Liverpool, with 43 merchant ships arranged in 9 columns, escorted by 6 corvettes and 2 destroyers. The 6 silent ships were spread throughout the formation 2 in the starboard columns to port 2 in the center. The convoy commodore wasn't informed about the experiment. The U-boats weren't informed. The test would be live. German naval intelligence tracked the convoy's departure. 37 U-boats of Wolfpack Group Mies deployed in patrol lines directly across the convoy's expected route. They were waiting, listening. On April 25, 1943, at 2:14 a.m., aboard U-264, Captain Lieutenant Hartwig studied his charts. His hydrophone operator had been tracking convoy sounds for 6 hours, but was confused. The contact signal was weakening. The original bearing was 29-0, but the signal was now intermittent. Some ships were very loud, others almost silent. Intermittent. That's impossible. Either hear a convoy or you don't. Hartwig frowned, but he was tracking multiple signatures, some ships clearly at 40 kilometers, others disappearing at 5. It made no sense. He ordered the U-boat to periscope depth and looked through the scope. Dark shadows against a dark sky. But something was wrong. His hydrophone should have been picking up all 43 ships. Instead, he was only tracking 27. 6 ships scattered throughout the convoy were generating no acoustic signature at all. Hartwig made a decision that saved Allied lives. He targeted only ships he could hear clearly. The modified vessels, now quieter than the surrounding ambient ocean noise, slipped past the entire wolf pack, utterly undetected. On April 27, 1943, 600 miles west of Ireland, the full force of Wolfpack Meese engaged convoy on 184 for 18 hours. The attacks were relentless and brutal. By sunrise, 9 merchant ships were sunk, a terrible loss of 3,200 men and 47,000 tons of cargo lost to the ocean floor. But here is the critical statistica, only one that truly matters. Of the 9 ships sunk, 0 were the modified vessels. The 6 ships fitted with Lawson's acoustic dampening system, including the SS William Eustace, survived unto when Convoy 184 reached New York on May 7th. Commander Gretton immediately signaled London. The message was clear. Modified vessels showed 0 enemy engagement despite comparable positions within the convoy formation. Acoustic dampening effective under combat conditions. Recommended immediate fleet-wide implementation. By May 12th, Admiralty statistical analysis stunned everyone. In March 1943, before acoustic dampening, average U-boat detection range was 11.4 nautical miles, with convoy ship losses per Wolfpack engagement at 31%. After acoustic dampening from May to July 1943, average detection range dropped to 0.6 nautical miles and ship losses fell to 4.7% PRA. Engagement a reduction of 85%. But the other side of the coin was just as important. U-boats that once detected convoys from 50 miles away now had to approach within half a mile. This brought them into a Sticksona range, radar range, and visual range. Wolfpack tactics collapsed because submarines couldn't coordinate attacks without hearing each other. Their losses increased by 400%. May 1943 became known as Black May in German naval history, the turning point in the Battle of the Atlantic. Allied forces sank 41 U-boats that mounted 25% of Germany's operational fleet, wiped out in 30 days. Admiral Karl de Nitz Eswardari entry on May 24th captured the defeat. The enemy has achieved technical supremacy, robbing us of our most effective weapon, surprise attack. Convoys have become nearly invisible to hydrophone surveillance. Old certainties are gone. A captured German hydrophone operator from U-9, sunk on May 19th, told British interrogators, "We couldn't understand what happened. Sometimes we heard convoy sounds from great distances. Other times ships were practically on top of us before we detected them. It was as if the ocean itself had become silent." By July 1943, 847 Allied merchant ships had been fitted with Lawson's acoustic dampening modifications, with installation time slashed to 48 hours per ship and cost reduced to $20,000 per vessel. From May to December 1943, Allied losses dropped to 329 vessels, down from 729 over the previous 8 months. U-boat losses grew similarly, with 237 destroyed, saving an estimated 4,200 merchant seamen, 4,200 men, saved from certain death, who instead returned home. The Battle of the Atlantic was not yet won. It raged until May 1945, but the tide had decisively turned. The hunters had become the hunt. After the war, testimonials were unanimous. In 1946, Admiral Sir Max Horton wrote in his memoirs, among the many innovations that secured victory in the Atlantic radar, Haftoff, escort carriers none were as simple or as devastatingly effective as Lawson's acoustic dampening system. A cook without engineering training solved a problem that baffled our best scientists. Commander Peter Gretton, who risked his career on a hunch, wrote in his 1964 book, Tommy Lawson never fired a shot in anger. He never commanded a ship, but he saved more lives than any captain in the Royal Navy. His genius was seeing what everyone else missed, that the solution wasn't more technology, but a better use of the ocean itself. The system became standard equipment and evolved into the modern prairie masker noise reduction system still used on American warships, using compressed air bubbles instead of static water chambers. But the principle of physics remains identical. Create an acoustic barrier to mask machinery noise. And what of the humble hero himself? Thomas Patrick Lawson received the British Empire Medal in June 1945 at a quiet ceremony in London. He refused interviews and publicity. When the New York Times requested an interview in 1947, he declined, sending only a short note. I just noticed something and mentioned it. Other people did the real work. After the war, Lawson returned to Boston. He opened a small diner in Dorchester, married, had 3 children, and never publicly spoke of his contribution. His own wife would not learn the full story until 1978, when a British naval historian tracked him down for a book. Lawson died in 1991, aged 70. He says his obituary in the Boston Globe was 3 sentences. A retired restaurant owner and merchant marine veteran, no mention of acoustic dampening. No mention of the 4,200 lives he saved. No mention that a high school dropout with a notebook had changed naval warfare forever. At his funeral, 3 elderly British naval officers who had survived the Battle of the Atlantic attended. One, trembling, placed a small handwritten note in Lawson's casket. It read, "Because of you, we came home." In 2011, the U.S. Naval Academy added Lawson's story to its leadership curriculum. The lesson is simple. Innovation doesn't require credentials. It requires observation, courage, and the willingness to challenge expert consensus. Lawson succeeded not because he was trained in acoustics, but because he paid attention when no one else did. The most dangerous phrase in warfare isn't "that's impossible." It's "we've always done it this way." Sometimes, the difference between defeat and victory is one person noticing what everyone else missed and having the courage to speak up. If you found this story as fascinating and inspiring as we have, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring you more untold stories from the greatest conflict in human history. Don't forget to comment below what moment in history has inspired you the most. Join the conversation and help keep history alive. Stay tuned for more episodes from WWII Chronicles, where the past shapes the present.